Okay, well, thank you for having us here at this conference. This is our first time up here, and I know we're kind of far out of your normal sphere of influence, but I thought we might have some things that you'd find interesting here, and you were gracious enough to accept the proposal, so we'll see if we can get on with it. This is a program that was, it kind of came about with my predecessor in this position, talking to the Missouri Department of Conservation non-point source folks about trying to protect large or small pieces of the river by having conservation easements in the riparian area to prevent degradation of the banks in the riparian area of the river. We have to have a lot of partners in order to do that. We're not a land trust, so we partnered with one of our local land trusts, Ozarks Greenways. They're known for trails, but they also are a land trust, and they do a lot of that work. And of course, we're housed kind of in a symbiotic relationship with Missouri State University. And my friend and colleague Bob Pavlovsky and his group at the OReilly are the ones that we use whenever we need to get the data and things like that. We don't have a lab, so we have to contract that out. Our mission for my organization, the mission is we're trying to protect the water quality in the James River. We work in any area of the basin that we can. And our vision is pretty simple. We want clean water for you, your children, and your grandchildren. And I know those are all, that's the way visions are supposed to be. They're supposed to be grand. The objectives today, we're going to do an overview of the Riparian project. I hope to at least fill you in on what it is and how it came about. We'll talk about the review to the progress today, and we will describe how the assessment of the river was done. I'll hand off to Bob over here, and he will talk about the assessment process. And then we'll summarize the benefits of the program for 319 projects. How many of you have worked with 319 projects and grants and things like that? Not very many. Yeah? Okay. It's kind of a different animal, if you will, when you start working with them. This is just a summary of the basin. We have parts of 8 counties. I include Wright County up here because of that little 150 yards that they are in the basin. But basically, we flow down into the Table Rock Lake area, and the basin has about 1 million acres. So we've got a pretty large area. We have 1,460 square miles, and you can read the rest of that. We do have, one of the challenges we have is we have the 3rd largest metropolitan area in the state, kind of right in the middle of the basin. And I tell people that when we work with the James River Basin, we have a river that's a rural, urban, agricultural, and industrial river. And some people are lucky enough to have one or the other. We've got them all there in the basin. The Riparian Corridor project came about, and we actually had the grant awarded in 2009, so we've been at this a little over 5 years now. We had 2 extensions on the grant, and I'll get to that in a minute. We got a $600,000 grant, and of course, if you work with 319, you have, for every $10 you spend, you have to have 4 of non-federal in-kind. So we had to have $400,000 roughly in match. The total value of the grant, when we got, if we complete the whole thing, is about $1 million. Our goal is currently 10 miles of riparian corridor. We've already got nearly 20 miles of corridor under protection by easements. And this was a new thing under the sun for at least DNR in Missouri and EPA in Region 7. And that's just a moment I think I would take to tell you that. It took a lot of time to talk to them about the fact that these easements can be BMPs if they're done properly. And to their credit, to the credit of EPA at Region 7 and DNR, we were able to get a process worked out where we could use the value of the donated easements, the property that was in the easement, as match for the grants, which went a long way to helping us cover that $400,000 in match. The easements were also different in that we were asking people to donate the easement. Those of you who have worked with easements before on conservation easements, the typical process is you find a landowner that's willing to sell you an easement, you raise money, you purchase the easement, and then the landowner sometimes gives a little of that money back for maintenance and all that. We were asking them to donate this easement. So that's a little bit more of a hard sell. What we had to sweeten the pot for them was, though, that if they had cattle in the stream or something like that, we had money to pay for fencing, we had money to pay for alternative watering supplies. We also had money to cover all of the legal costs and things like that. So there was a trade-off there. So these are also perpetual easements. I asked an attorney when I first got into this, can you tell me what perpetual means? He said, well, forever. And I said, okay. So that's what these are for. These are forever easements. The other problem or issue that we had with this, we started in 2009 really going to the landowners and talking to them. And you all know what happened to the real estate market in 2008. So we spent about 2 years trying to overcome the lowering of appraised values of property, which is kind of hard to convince somebody to donate. The benefit that the landowner could get also, we don't get into it with them, but there is a potential for them to get some tax benefits if they're a large enough donor. These are the projects and that we have completed and or are still working on. The River Bluff Farm, and I'll give you some more information about it, in Stone County. Approximately 5 linear miles when you add up all of the easement on about 1,500 acres of farm along the James River. We've also worked with the city of Springfield and the Greene County Parks on an easement at the River Cut Golf Course and the Crider Park area, which sits right on the James River. We're awaiting a modeling report, and that one will be done. And Wilson's Creek above the Southwest wastewater plant in Springfield is one that we're particularly proud of because we had cattle in the stream there, we had a very degraded stream bank, and we had a need for alternative water. So we were able to use all 3 of our incentives to get that done. We built 2 miles of fencing there and for cattle and all that. We now have the cattle out. We also planted trees, and I'll mention that in a minute. We're working on some pending ones. They come in and they go. We talk to them. They say they want to do it, and then they back out and all that. And so we've usually got about 3 of them that are pending in various areas. This is the Larry O'Reilly River Bluff Farm in Stone County in Missouri. Upstream is this way, downstream is this way, and the shaded area kind of outlines for you the dimensions of the easement that he donated to us. And you know, everybody has their own reasons for doing easements. In his case, he knew that his kids were not interested in the farm after he was gone, and he wanted to save the improvements that he'd made on the land. He's been managing it for upland game for years and things like that, and he wanted to make sure the river stayed in good shape. So his easement ranges from about 500 feet from the center of the stream. On average, it'll be about 200 feet over the whole thing, and the smaller little arms are spring branches that rise on his property, and he decided to go ahead and protect those too, because when we had it appraised, the appraisers would look at it as the best use, and the best use was development, basically over time. This is just an upstream view of the O'Reilly property. That's the north side, and that's going to be protected forever, and we like to keep our river in as good a shape as we can. On the Wilson's Creek project, we involved about 120 Springfield citizens. We had students, we had other people that we partner with, other organizations and things like that. And we did 2 linear miles of fencing, a mile on each side, keeping out cattle, and we also planted about 5,000 seedlings. We also planted about 140 or so of the larger trees, and we're hoping that we get a pretty good canopy cover over there. And we have about, after 2 years from the planting, we have about a 60 to 70% survival rate on those seedlings that we put in, which is pretty good considering how dry it's been in some cases. The things we learned about doing these easements. The term easement is a loaded term. I don't know how many of you work with easements, conservation easements. Okay, a lot of people hear the word easement and they think it's we're giving our land away and the government's going to take it and things like that. And that's a pretty big step to get over. I think being a nonprofit and working with the government agencies rather than being the agency kind of helped us talk to people about this. But it does create some issues when you're trying to talk to somebody about how the easement works. Private easements are very hard to get. It took us 3 years to get the first one. And as you may know about 319 grants, sometimes you're on a 2-year clock. Now we did have a 4-year clock here, but those grants just don't sync with the easement process. We got 2 extensions on this grant in order to continue to get these easements. Public easements, we found out, are sometimes easier to get. than the private easements, and that was the case with the cities. And there's many different benefits to the cities. One of the questions I asked when I went in to propose these easements to the folks in the city and the county was, well, you've got this farm out here that's a buffer for your wastewater plant. In the past, the city had considered selling that property to raise some money. So I said, if you can sell that, then where's your buffer for your plant? Wouldn't it be good if you had a conservation easement there so that when you sold the property, you still had the buffering ability of that? And they tended to agree with that, so we were able to do it. Same with the Kreider property and the golf course. So about 3 years for each easement, and make sure if you try to do this with the agencies that you can get an extension on that grant, because there are a lot of variables when you talk to people about easements. We must have done pretty good because the National Association of Clean Water Agencies took our Wilson's Creek project and awarded the Conservation Award for 2013 to the partners that were working on that Wilson's Creek project, and they thought it was something that was pretty good. So I'm going to pass off to Bob Pavlovsky, and he's going to fill you guys in on what we found out on the OReilly property.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, so when Joe came to us, he said, well, for any 319 project, you also have to have some kind of assessment, some kind of estimate of load reduction. How good are we doing, or what is the good that we might do? A lot of times on these things, if you worked on these projects, it's always hard to get to the end of a project before the report's due, right? So for this project, we worked on the OReilly property, or River Bluff farm, and we had a few tasks to do, and this is about 7.2 kilometers of river that we had to look at. So when we did set up the assessment system, we first did sort of a geomorphic and non-point source assessment of the channel. We looked at bank heights, bank composition, width of the channel, sediment depth out in the channel, all these things that we could do to then tie back into other plan form assessments that we're going to do. And we basically did two plan form assessments. One, they also had a smaller reach, about 200 meters or so, where they try to do where they did do willow staking. So for that, and over the timeline of a year that we had to assess, chances of getting, hoping that Google will shoot our bank the beginning of the project at the end probably wasn't gonna be there. So we used erosion pins there. But then backing off on the longer segment, we had to look at. We were thinking that, okay, for this area, we'd have two major sources of non-point. One would be the land use on that easement. The other one would be bank erosion rates. And so we looked at the larger scale bank erosion rates for that reach, and you've seen several talks already where you take the most recent photo, we compare it to older photos, rectified photos, and we look at bank line changes over time. We combine that with our channel assessments of type of material, depth of bank, and we can put those changes together to estimate sediment coming out into the river. And finally, looking at the actual load reduction analysis, a simple spreadsheet type of balance was used with the STEP-L model, and we used load duration analysis. We had other studies of the river where we looked at sort of several years of flow data to put together sediment loads throughout the river for sediment and also for nitrogen and phosphorus too. So while we didn't, under that 319, we didn't have the money to do a full-blown assessment there, we pulled in these previous studies to sort of put what we did at that one site into the context of the whole watershed, sort of thinking if we used assessments, easement programs for the whole river, what kind of reduction would we expect? So critical here is we're working on our project at the riparian scale. And so we were focusing here, but 319 program is set up, at least in Missouri, they stress the context into the watershed. So we have watershed effects and we have our project. So we set up this assessment to just try to give them some information on how well our project's doing in both of these scales. Now, our project is located about here, and Joe already talked about where we sit, but here's Springfield. Most of the watershed is above this point. One of the major receiving water bodies down here is Table Rock Lake. So, and it's a big tourist area. If you ever heard of Branson, Branson's over here. And so obviously people don't want really green lakes with a lot of floating algae, right? So we're very cautious about this. So we're basically thinking about loadings from this point, from gathering above this watershed and thinking about how much is going down into the lake. So just an example of the types of data that we looked at. It's hard to read, but this would be segments, points going downstream in the study area here. And then we look at things like active channel width, bank height, where bedrock bluffs are located, and bedrock in the bed. In Ozarks streams, a lot of times valleys are a little narrow, bedrock is near the surface, not a lot of vertical, as much vertical instability as we saw in Karen's talk, where the channels drop in. Well, we don't have that kind of thing here. And in some places, bedrock lines the bank in a lot of areas. So when you're doing your bank erosion assessments, you got to pull those out because they're obviously contributing sediment and a couple orders of magnitude less than those from the larger situation. Now here's an example of how we looked at long-term rates. 52, our first year of the photo, our earliest photo, the 2008. Look at bank lines, subtract them out. Look at the change. This is also the area where they put willow staking right along here. So we'll look at that a little more focused in just a second here. But so that's what we're looking at there. And then if we look at erosion rates and actually look at how the data has turned out, we basically this is the main point where spatially, as we look down across the whole 7.2 kilometer reach, bank erosion rates are not constant, right? There's some places where we have bedrock bluffs, and some places where on bends where more sediment is being taken out. So that's a kind of an interesting pattern. Can't just assume one rate, and I don't think you can say that about any place, but the idea where you can have no erosion because of the bedrock, you have to be cautious about that. Then as we, again, focusing in here, we've got bank erosion rates, long and short term. Short term, we're using erosion pins. And so when we look at an example here of, that's okay, that's good, this will work out. Okay, never mind. Thought there was a slide in there. Whoops. Anyway, one thing here is when we look at a small bank here, this is where they had the willow stakes in. What has been going on here is that the river turns to the bends to the left here, and a fairly large gravel bar has been building into this area. And as it does, it's been squeezing the channel over. This riparian buffer of trees, it's very, very narrow. You can see where they planted trees here earlier. The trees start picking up here. The riparian buffer, at least the more mature buffer, if you can call it that, has been blown out, and now it's moving into the field. And so this is where they decided to put the willow stakes. But now when you look at erosion rates and what we find, the first thing is when we started that project, we basically were at the tail end of a period of no rain, right? So we're waiting for, this is time going in this direction, 2013, 2012. And so we're checking pins, nothing, a little bit, and finally it starts to rain. We start to get a little bit of flood. So obviously these erosion rates are over 1 year, did not spell the whole lifetime of a project, but this is what we have to work with. And the other thing is when we look at the data here at a different scale, this is only, the last map I looked at was 7.2 kilometers. This is 200 meters. It looks good that we have willow stakes here and we have relatively low rates of change. The The problem is that's probably helpful to the willow stakes a little bit, attributed to it, but also where it sits. This area already had gone through its widening. The deposition of the bar shifted upstream a little bit, and now the pressure for expansion of the channel was moving into this buffer here. So this area is probably gonna, if we went and looked at it a couple of years later now, we might see this might still be eroding. But this is some things that we learn. And again, this area is going into the easement program, so we're gonna hope that those things improve. So we get this data and we get this information on the amount of sediment that's being released every year, amount of phosphorus. We did samples from the bank to find out how much phosphorus is in the bank, and samples and measure nitrogen too. And we get different rates, and the larger reach, the average per unit area per meter of bank source is much lower than what you get in the short-term willow stake reach. That was an actively eroding reach. The other one raises more of a, average. So there's almost a 5 times difference in that rate, which is not something surprising. So we have this idea of how much sediment's coming up from the bank. The next is going to be to model, think about different scenarios. What do we do with the land? Is it going to be urban? Maybe, but probably not. Is it going to be pasture? Is it going to be woods? We put that on there and we look at runoff. In general, these lands are relatively small strips. The total amount of magnitude of phosphorus running off of these landscapes were not great compared to the potential for that eroding out of the banks. But we had to look at that, and so when we look at our different runs, we look at existing conditions and we look at how much phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediment would be expected to come off of it. 100% woods, forested. Our buffer would sort of target here, pasture and cropland and mixed pasture. In the Ozarks, we have very little, really no agricultural systems like we have here, right? So it's very different, mostly beef with fescue pasture land. However, there are some places where they have corn or other more row crop kind of. Whoop, I went back. Let me fix that. All right. So what do we find? So basically, to summarize, maybe about 80% of the existing non-point load can be reduced if it reverts back to forest. And this is a time thing. That doesn't happen the first day, does it? It takes time. But that would be what we would expect. Also, protecting it from other types of land use, more intensive land use, would then lead to potentially 3 to 5 times reduction compared to what it would be in the future. So this is kind of a tricky situation because the benefit is being looked at or prorated into the future. Now for us in 319, that was something that we weren't really sure how DNR and EPA would like it, but apparently it went okay. Now we upscaled our bank erosion data to fit the whole main stem of the James River. And we estimated the load coming out of the bank. Now that's a pretty big upscale, right? But the thing is, we just wanted to look at it, and then we looked at loads that go into the lake at the town of Galena, not the same Galena here, obviously. This is down in our neck of the woods, but where the river flows into the lake. And so basically, with that simple comparison, we could reduce non-point loads to the lake by about 10 to 25%. So it's potential, but it rates that it's worth a try. We have a TMDL for the James, and so a lot of this is sort of driving that, trying to figure out where our sources are coming from and what we're doing there. So basically, riparian easements can reduce non-point source. I don't think it's a surprise, but I think it's good. It was a point that taking the assessment, matching it up with what Joe is doing, and actually giving it to DNR and EPA and have them say, we want to do more of this. Okay, so that's always a good sign. So in conclusion, the methodology was relatively economical. We could talk about the scientific flaws here and there, but we have to work with what we have with the short time span and the limited budget. We quantified both the effects from runoff as well as bank erosion, and we could work in different influence of geomorphology, watershed contributions, and such, and we combine it with other efforts already going. And finally, this is a tool that seems to mesh with the planning framework, with the way they like reporting, and so it seemed to be a success there. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for a couple questions.
I'm curious if you had considered, in addition to the nutrient reductions, investigating or estimating changes that might occur to carbon storage on the floodplain as a result of the shifts that you're proposing?
No, we didn't. But yeah. Right. But anyway, we could, yeah. But we haven't.
It will really take you into a proactive state.
Okay, yeah.
Rather than just trying to solve the problem, but we're now contributing to a much broader.
No, it's a great idea. We could maybe do it. Yeah.
Just quick, who was it the county that owns the easements, or do you guys own it? I guess
The Ozark Greenways is a land trust, and they hold the easements. And we are just we're the ones that wrote the grant, we managed the grant, and we put the parts together, and we help collect the volunteers to do the work and all that.
is one thing I some of my experience I have with easements is sometimes it's kind of tough to get with enforcement.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you guys have thought about kind of long-term enforcement of the easements.
Yeah.
Kind of good over off the bat, 10, 15 years, couple of landowners down the line might be good.
Right. Terry Wade is the director of Ozark Greenways, and they run into that quite frequently. There is requirement under the terms of the easement to monitor annually and for encroaching on the easement or for other kinds of things like that. And then it's up to his group and the land trust to go to the landowners or whoever the property is transferred to and say, you're aware there's an easement here and this is not there, so we have to work out some sort of so. But yeah, that's taken care of in the long term as well as the short. Maybe did I answer your question?
Well, let's have to, what kind of sticks do you guys have?
Well, you have basically with the land trust, you have facility courts. I mean, hopefully it doesn't go that far, but that's kind of what, and quite frankly, easements can be busted with gap. So they're not perfect, but it travels with the land, so it's attached to the deed.
All right, well, thank you, gentlemen.